I should say this on every single episode. The biggest breakthrough for me was that 180 from thinking like, oh, self-distribution would be really complicated and difficult to landing on, wow, I cannot believe how easy and effective self-distribution is, that it is actually simpler than having a distributor and managing like all aspects of that relationship.
Yeah.
Or, maybe like at least it takes up a comparable amount of my time, and then we doubled our sales in the first year, so that was like pretty incredible. So hi, I'm Joe Beal, the founder and CEO of Microcosm Publishing. I'm also the author of A People's Guide to Publishing, which distills what I've learned from selling millions of books over the past 28 years.
I'm Elly Blue, the Vice President of Microcosm. We started this podcast to share what we've learned with newer publishers, so you can learn from our mistakes. Or maybe you just want to learn about the publishing industry.
This week, we answer a reader question. How does a small publisher get sales reps?
Yeah, lots of people are asking about this.
Distribution. Hot topic lately.
Yeah, the whole demise of SPD has really sparked a conversation among people wanting to think about distribution differently.
And we're hearing a lot more from just publishers in general that they're thinking more outside the box, which obviously near and dear to my heart. And it's neat that this leads them to questions like this, because again, when we went back to self-distributing in 2018, I had all these like, oh, this is probably like really complicated and difficult, and if I didn't have the relationships that I had, it might have been, but we kind of knew what we were doing, and there were people that we could ask about things that we didn't know what we were doing.
Right, but if we hadn't had any of that, it would have been even more complicated and difficult.
It's not right for everybody. Like, let's let me not mince words, but it did double our sales straight away, and it really was not nearly as complicated or difficult as I thought it would be.
So finding sales reps, there's like the question of how we did it, which I think is a story worth telling, and then the question of how should somebody who's much smaller do it?
Yeah, so I had Sarah, who handles she's our buyer for our distribution business. So I told her to tear out the back page of every single catalog from every other publisher, and because it always lists who their sales reps are, like who their sales teams are. And I probably still have it in a drawer somewhere, like those.
You had a binder full of sales reps.
I had it. Well, some of them were women. I just would like to be clear.
If you don't get that joke, then
you were not around in the 2012 election. And yeah, great work. So those pages, and then I went down and I looked, I sort of cross-referenced who the salespeople were and how available those publishers were. So if they were like niche university academic publishers, or like we're largely not available in this region, I was like, okay, so that group is probably not for us, because we're not an academic publisher. And then I looked for overlap. So if 3 publishers that I liked and whose books were widely available used the same rep group in a region, I was like, okay, then they're probably a good one for us to try. And then we reached out to those reps and we said, we're planning this, like, would you be willing to sell our line? And, it's kind of the same way a distributor would evaluate you. They look at what you publish and how many books you have and how easy it is going to be for them to convince stores to write orders for your books. Because when you have a distributor, your major advantage is that they're writing orders with you and every other publisher handled by that distributor. Whereas when you're on your own, it's your own books. So, and usually these are like 10 unit minimums. So if a store can't find 10 books of yours that they would sell, they're not going to write an order, And more to the point, a rep is probably not going to represent you if they can't sell you. Because you have to look at it from the 2 points, which is it's not writing the order that is expensive for the store, it's managing all those outgoing checks.
Right.
And so that is really time intensive and expensive as a result for every store, because then they're sending out your check for $59 or your check for $18 sometimes.
And we'll do an episode about this later, but this is one of the things that we're hoping Batch will resolve or help resolve.
Shout out to Ellison Hill for telling every publisher and every bookstore to sign up for Batch at Winter Institute. Best advice. Everybody should. And I do love to brag, because we were among the first 5 publishers to sign up for Batch, which really seems wrong. Like, we should be the 500th or something, you know.
So how big do you think how many titles do you think a publisher needs to have in order for a rep group to like really be able to do good work with them?
It doesn't really matter how many books you have. It matters how many sort of evergreen best-selling books you have.
Like bookstore books.
And not only that, I mean, most publishers are making bookstore books.
Right.
But it's like, how many of your books will be relevant in a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? You know, you look at it that way. And how many of... So, if you have one title that they're going to order in a year, they'll probably, like, build an order with that title and then whatever new books you have. And that's going to be enough for some places, but not every place. So you would want to have, you know, a number of continually selling books is essentially the answer to that question. And so, and your books would need to sell well as a list. Like, they would need to think incongruity, you know, not in incongruity, but incongruity. And so, for example, if you do like children's books, business books, mind, body, spirit books, it's going to get too convoluted because you're going to end up with too many different buyers, and it's not actually going to sell well. Whereas, like, if you're a home and garden publisher, you have one buyer. They're going to know all of your books because they're going to buy your books, and they're going to have no problem finding 10 books to meet their minimums, you know. Whereas, like, if you do fiction, you're going to need to have some best-selling backlist to make that work. Otherwise, they're just going to write orders for the new season. And if they can't get enough, they're not going to write that order.
So it's not always super easy, but it is something to aim for.
Well, it's like building your publishing program from the ground up needs to be step one.
Right. And like, if you're just starting out, like, honestly, you're probably the best salesperson for your book. So you like are the one making those calls. And then eventually you can like hire your friend and give them 15% of invoice or whatever to do them for you. And then once you have that track record, you could, you know, either hire your friend full time or replace them with a rep group or Right. Yeah. And that's partly what we ran into also, is that in a lot of cases, if your stuff isn't selling, you're going to fall to the bottom of your salesperson's bag and they're going to stop showing you to those stores. And so what we ran into is that in a lot of cases, you're really most effective having like a strong telesalesperson that is just calling all those stores and getting them to write orders. And you're like, oh, this is great. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us once again.
Please send your questions to podcast@microcosmpublishing.com so we can answer them on future episodes.
And please give us 5 stars on iTunes and everywhere else that podcasts are reviewed.
You can find us on the internet at microcosm.pub.
On Twitter at Microcosm.
On Facebook at Microcosm Publishing.
On Instagram at Microcosm_pub.
And here in Portland, Oregon on North Williams Avenue.
Thank you so much.
Have a wonderful week.